0, 1, 2, 3. Let's get started.
Good. Very good.
So do the intro and the
Yeah.
Are you ready?
introduce everybody, whatever.
Action.
Cut it out.
All right. Well, everybody, we are here, Buffalo Modular's first podcast. So this is probably going to be a huge disaster. So this should be fun for everybody. We got Jeremy here, myself, Jonathan, and Rick Daniels from Prime Lending that we asked to join us today. So we wanted to dig into a bunch of the initial questions that people ask in the building process now. But I guess first, just to start us off here, Rick, how long have you been with Prime Lending? What's your primary role in the building process for people?
So I've been with Prime Lending for just under 10 years. I've been in the mortgage industry for 27. So yeah, I'm really young.
Wow, got started really young.
I've specialized in new construction from the very beginning. I like relationship lending versus transactional lending. So when it comes to construction financing, we know that it's a longer process. Obviously, there's a home being built along the way, so it gives you a chance to like get to know the clients and help them versus just taking an application and moving on. So my role is generally trying to help them to determine what their budget needs to be so that we can figure out how to help them, accomplish their home building goals, but their home financing goals as well.
That's great. That's great. So what, we get people all the time that say, hey, I have no idea what it even looks like to build a home at all. I was just looking for a home and I'm frustrated because I can't seem to find anything that I want, or it's insanely expensive to do. So I started searching for things and found you guys. So tell me how to even get started. So usually what we start with is there's 3 initial steps to that. What are we building? Where are we building? And how are we paying for it? So from an initial standpoint of how are we paying for it, some of these things would involve you directly in that. But Jeremy and Rick, what are the different ways that people can pay for a building project? What are the different options that people have? So Rick, why don't we start with you?
So obviously financing's one. There's that dirty cash deal, that
that doesn't help you in the lending business very much.
Right, exactly. My least favorite kind of financing. But no, so there's construction financing that we can do, and depending on the project, whether they're going to act as their own general contractor or whatever the case is, there's different programs that are available with the financing. I think what's working really well and has for a long time is the handoff process, where you, Jonathan, will speak with them and say, hey, listen, why don't you talk to Rick and get an idea of what your budget is, as well as making sure that everything's going to happen the way you're hoping, right? Because at the very beginning, you're setting great expectations for the client, right? So that they know,
Right.
Okay, beforehand, what needs to be what. Because in many cases, they'll come to me and say, and you've already had the conversation with them saying, I am exhausted trying to buy an existing home. I just think it's better to just build at this point. Like, what are my options? What does it look like? And then we start with, well, instead of me finding out like how much you're qualified for, like how much of a payment are you comfortable with? Because at the end of the day, that's what you're going to be making every month. Because a lot of times people have this preconceived notion of how much a house costs versus how much it costs a month, right? So they'll say like, oh, I only can spend this much because I want to keep my payment at a certain level. And lo and behold, we might be able to do more because the payment's lower than what they were expecting. So I focus on that budget payment, and then from there they come back to you and say, all right, I've spoken with Rick, and like this is the range we need to be in. What kind of home would we be looking at? And that just has been really good because we get them focus on their, we don't have them going into it like looking at the best and the most expensive house and then find out that that's not what they can afford. And then they start feeling like, wait a second, now I'm not as happy with what I would have been had I looked at the right house from the beginning.
Right. Exactly. Jeremy, we get a lot of people too that have some front end capital, either because they just sold a home or different circumstances and that come up. What are some of the other circumstances that people handle, at least maybe some of the front end initial payments of a building project, and what those tend to look like?
So we joked a little bit about paying cash for the build, but that actually happens a lot. And that's great if you can afford to, pay cash for the build. Usually it's not quite full cash, it's a portion of it cash. And so there's a couple things that's worth talking about just for people to understand how a construction loan works and what the money down requirement is. And so you know the one side of the pendulum is I'm going to pay for the whole thing cash, and I've sold my house, I'm retiring, I'm going to downsize and build a cabin, on my mountain retreat or what have you, cabin in the woods kind of deal, and they're going to sell their house and take the proceeds in order to build this other house. In that scenario, you still need to get the cash out of the house you sell. And then there's an interim of when you're actually constructing the new home that you need to, you need to think about where you're going to stay.
Right.
And so in that scenario, a lot of times the best option is to take a line of credit out on your existing house. So you take all your equity out of your existing house. And Rick, you can do lines of credit. I think you've done that for a number of people as well. They can take the money out, the equity out of their existing house, build the new house, cash, and then move into the new house and then sell the existing house and pay off that line of credit. That's a scenario that happens fairly frequently. Another scenario, Rick, you could talk a little bit more about this, is when the customer needs to come up with a down payment for the loan. And we should talk a little bit more about down payment, what constitutes that,
Right.
Does the land value, the equity in the land constitute a down payment for the mortgage, for the new construction mortgage? And then is there a delta there of money that you need to come up with? And sometimes there is. And, a lot of times Rick will offer to take a line of credit out, take some equity out of your existing house in order to come up with some additional cash in order to make the mortgage work on the new construction project. And so maybe, Rick, you could chat a little bit about that scenario for people as well.
Yeah, if you could speak to that, Rick, and then also the other way that we see people do this all the time is people will say, "Well, can I get the loan to cover the land purchase as well?" So maybe speak to both of those things would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so Jeremy, that was a good point. Like in some cases, they have the equity in their home to pay cash, but they just need to get to it first. And in some cases, they have some equity in their home, but are planning on financing. Generally speaking, on a construction loan, you're going to need somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% down plus your closing costs. You'll be responsible for your own tax and insurance escrows during construction, so you'll be paying those yourself. So that's not something that we need to account for at closing, simply the closing costs and whatever that 15 to 20% down payment is. The great news is if you own the land already or a portion thereof, we get to utilize whatever equity you have towards your down payment, assuming the appraisal supports it. What I mean by that is we'll do an appraisal based on what the home will be worth when it's all done being built. The appraiser will find comparable home sales in the area and say, okay, based on those sales, this is what the house will be worth when it's done. We get to base our loan versus value off of that figure. So therefore, whatever land equity we have, we can use that to borrow toward and use it towards your down payment. Let's say there's a gap there, because sometimes there is. In those cases, if you have a home to sell, as Jeremy was alluding to, what I'll recommend is, hey, go get a home equity on the home that you're going to sell. Utilize that towards your down payment because you were going to put that into the new home anyway, but at least now you don't have to move twice. So that's certainly a way to fill that gap and help people get into, the financing process a lot sooner.
That's great. That's great. So speaking to that, from a plain English standpoint for people, from the point of initially deciding that they'd like to build, up until the time that they're actually paying a mortgage payment, what are the different payment things that they need to be accounting for? You mentioned the 20% down, you mentioned closing costs. Is there other things that are going to come up along the way? Because the loan is intended to cover the majority of it if they're getting a loan, obviously, right? So what are is there other things that they need to be aware of and ready for now, especially if they're, plan on staying in their existing home and paying their mortgage during that time as well? Because that would be, I'm assuming there's additional costs as well that they need to account for.
Yeah, so during construction, you'll be responsible for paying interest only on what's outstanding only. So you're not going to be paying interest on the whole loan. You'll just like a credit card or a line of credit, you'll be paying on what you've used or what you've dispersed for, with those progress draws as the home is being built. So that makes it a little easier to carry both, in a lot of cases. So, but that's really the only thing, like at the very beginning, like I said, we'll do that appraisal. We
Yep.
collect that appraisal fee up front so we can pay the appraiser and get the report done. Other than that, the only other things that they would need to be mindful of would be stuff that you guys might have for them, and you could probably speak to better about, site preparation and, perk tests and things like that.
Yeah, Jeremy, can you speak into some of those, kind of things that a lot of people don't realize are some initial payments they might need to take care of that, might start before the loan is able to be activated and take care of those payments?
That's a good point. I think the budget that we typically provide is an all-inclusive budget to complete the project. So that would cover architectural fees, surveying fees, permitting fees, all of these types of kind of ancillary costs to building, we would want to account for in our budget. So when you get a budget from Buffalo Modular, it would have, excuse me, it would have all of these items in there. Depending on how quickly you want to move through the project and sort of get a jump start on the project, we might want to go ahead and number one, order blueprints for sure, get the ball rolling on your blueprints. You might need to order a survey, things of that nature. And so there's some deposits that we would request, initially, usually in concert with you applying for a loan and moving through the closing process on the loan. But that would be a little bit out of pocket. So for us, it might be a few $1,000s to have that initial blueprint process started, that planning phase started, and then when we're in through our full design, we've completed our custom design of your modular home. Then there's going to be an order deposit for the blueprints, and those two deposits typically come out of pocket for most people. That's a payment towards the overall total cost that we've budgeted for you. It's not an additional fee. It's built into the overall budget. And then after that, really the order deposit is the next thing to kick off the offsite portion of the build, to place our factory order in order to get on the schedule with the factory. And at that point, we've outlined our construction schedule with you. Most people are going to have that order deposit come from the bank. And so while we can order the blueprints and get rolling on that, because that takes a little bit of lead time, we're typically not going to actually order the house until we get that order deposit, and that usually comes when you close your loan. Sometimes it comes sooner, and so like Rick, probably maybe 50-50, maybe not quite that high. People have some extra money that they're going to bring to loan closing, and that might be the amount that we actually need to order the house anyways. And so we go through that construction planning with you and decide, together what works best for you, for your money and your budgeting and the overall timeline of the construction. And so, again, our budget typically is all inclusive of all of the fees, but then how quickly you want to move through and what your particular needs are, we might want to pay some of these things out of pocket prior to the loan being closed.
Yeah. Well, let's make it real tangible here, and we'll talk about an actual scenario, because what Jeremy and I talk about all the time is people ask about looking at a house and going to tour a house and stuff, and these things are important and a super helpful part of the process. But if you don't have a quote on a house, it just becomes this kind of fairyland of talking about these, maybe dreams of, 40 years from now, maybe someday I'll think about building a house. Having an actual quote to talk about really changes the way that you do a house tour and that. So for the sake of this conversation, I have a quote in front of me here for a just about 1,600 square foot ranch home. Okay. So this home, for the modular portion of the build, delivered and set onto the foundation, with nice cabinets and vinyl plank floors through the whole house. This house is 226. Okay, 226. And then the on-site portions of the build to round out the rest of the budget, your permits and surveys, excavation, basement, all the trades coming through, everything like that. That portion is 126. Okay. So you add those things together, that's your overall budget. Okay. So for a situation like this, Jeremy, why don't you, if you could start here talking about the timeline of different payment things that are due at different points in the time for this situation on this 1,500 square foot ranch.
So it's great to talk about tangible stuff. So yeah, we're 226 on a 1,600 square foot ranch. 226,000, that's $145 a square foot. And then typical site costs 126, that would be a foundation, your dirt works, like John said, the utility services coming in from the street, septic, water line, these kinds of things. That's another 126 or $80 a square foot. So $145 a square foot and $80 a square foot, you're at 225 a square foot without the land. And so a lot of people are going to come into this scenario saying, hey, my parents gave me some land, or we purchased some land. My wife and I purchased some land, a few years ago. We've cleared it over the last few years, put a driveway in, these kinds of things. And so that, those scenarios are fairly normal. Let's propose that or let's sort of hypothetical here. We're 226 and 126 is 352. So $352,000 project that's all said and done without the land. Let's assume the land is valued at 50,000. So that makes it 402. So just for quick math purposes, let's call it a $400,000 project. So a $400,000 project in this scenario, Rick, with $50,000 in land value that they've paid for, they own outright. What is that on 450 over
Be about
400?
320. The loan amount would be like 320 if they did 20% down.
Okay,
So that's where you would say, okay, if you got 320 as the loan that cover, to cover your closing costs and your bill price, and assume closing costs are like 10 grand.
right.
So
Okay. So 50,000 over 400, that's basically 13%. So the difference between then 350, a budget of 350 out of pocket, and the 320, that's 30,000. That's your difference between to get to a 20% down, right? So
right,
then in this scenario of a $400,000 build, they would need $30,000 down if they own the land. Or if they didn't own the land, they would need $80,000.
correct.
Doing quick math and stuff like that. Okay, so that's hopefully helpful for people. And if any of this stuff that we're working through we've moved too quickly, or there's an aspect of this that you want us to dig in a little bit more and clarify further for you, just notate in the comments, and we'll either comment back and answer that question, or if it's a broad enough topic, we could follow back with another call and clarify that. So in this scenario for us, from a budgeting standpoint, we would do $2,500 down to start the design and planning phase. And then once we've designed the home, we would do another $5,000 to actually order the blueprints. That would take you right through the blueprints process, and that would cover the architectural costs that we would incur in order to design this house for you. Then we get into the order set, and then trades deposits. And that's typically customized based on the bank. And I know Prime Lending, you've got a great product that you've sort of customized for us a little bit, right? Where you'll allow for us to take the factory order draw, which is typically between 35 and 60%, and then the set payment draw, which would round out the offsite portion of the cost. And then you would allow for the customer to disperse two or three additional draws directly to other subcontractors that they might need to employ in order to complete this project. So your excavator is going to be a big one. Excavator is going to be, doing all the dirt works and typically the exterior utility install, and then the contractor to do the stitching and seaming. A lot of times the homeowner is going to do the stitching and seaming themselves. And so you've done a really great job in allowing customers to have some flexibility in dispersing the the construction draw funds, not only for us for the offsite portion, but also to the contractors that they need to do the stitching and seaming and the site development costs. Is there anything beyond what I just said that they should know or you could speak to on that?
A couple of things I just want to point out real quick. When you mentioned the land and if they got it as a gift, just to note that that gift of equity counts as equity. So a lot of times
It's
clients
good to
they'll say,
know.
"Hey,
Yeah.
I want to wait until the land is in my name." Well, you don't have to. We don't have to wait till that happens. That can transpire as late as closing. So a lot of times they think that they got to
Hmm.
have the land in their name before they can get started, which is not the case. It's otherwise we keep ending up in like this hurry up and wait scenario where it's like I hurry up and do all this stuff and then I have to wait for the next phase of things to
Hmm.
happen. So, a lot of times what I always say is like, let's get the financing, approved and vetted out so we know that there's no surprises so that once we're ready to start building, we can start versus now we're ready to start financing because we think we're ready to start building. But Jeremy, to your point, with reference to the draws and things, yes, what we do allow is we allow the clients to up to four additional subcontractors. So if they can almost be their own general in that scenario. Where they're going to find these contractors, then you guys will do the home and do that like through the drop ship program, and then they can get the other contractors to put it together. We do have another program where they can truly be their own general contractor with an unlimited number of subcontractors. So there's definitely
Oh,
a way for both.
That's great because
yeah.
that's we really because we ship so far out in such a broad radius. What we really try to focus on is what we call kind of turnkey together. And so while
Oh, great
a lot
word.
of people haven't built a home before, once they go through the planning phase with us, we help outline the entire project, whether we're doing it or not, whether it's a different subcontractor that they have or a cousin who does HVAC or these kinds of things. They'll have a very clear understanding of how a house gets built from A to Z, from soup to nuts, as they call it. And they'll have a plan that we can work through with them. And from that perspective, we, go above and beyond being just a typical modular builder, where we really act more as a construction consultant, beyond just building the offsite portion, where we want to obviously see the project be a great success. We don't want them to have any surprises with unforeseen costs, things of that nature. And so we will work through, like I say, the entire project, whether we're doing it or not. They can get prices at cost from local contractors or trades that they need to have on the job in order to complete the project. And we do that as just a part of our process for no additional fee. And so in this environment of escalating costs over the last 5 years with the lockdowns and things of that nature, which has impacted inflation, customers have been nicely surprised in the end budget that they've been able to meet in order it's just simply by going through this turnkey together process that we've outlined, and that just allows them to work directly with subcontractors at their cost with no markup and no middleman, but with us being there as a consultant to vet the quote, to make sure that they've considered the scope of work that's required for the stitching and seaming or the on-site HVAC and plumbing tie-outs, the foundation or whatever it might be that they're going to take on themselves. They're not doing it in a vacuum. They're doing it with the support of us and our team who can ensure that that's going to be a successful project for them.
Yeah. That's
So
great.
those have been two great programs that you've had for us and available for our customers, Rick. And so that's been really quite useful. Not all banks do that. And so sometimes people come in and say, hey, I want to work with this bank, do you work with them? And, this is what I want. And, the easy answer is, we can see what their programs allow for and see if it will work out or not. But a lot of times people will say, hey, who would you recommend? Because it's usually easier to have the process go through someone who's done it before. And that's where you come in, Ray.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So,
One
so
last
turn,
big
oh,
question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
real
Rick.
quick, I just want to
Yeah.
comment that that turnkey together, I haven't heard that. We got, I think that's a good branding point that, well,
Is that your
get
dog?
into.
Let's see.
That's
Let's
what,
see that. Who's that?
Violet wanted to get into the frame apparently, didn't you?
Come
You
on.
want
Let's
to say,
see.
you want to say hi to everybody? No?
Come on now.
Now she does. Now she's being shy. Go figure. You know, she thought she had her moment in the spotlight. That's all she wanted. Yeah, I think so Jonathan, you said you had one more thing
Yeah, one
before we
last
wrap
big
up here. Yep.
question is timing of when to even start these conversations. Because I'll get people sometimes that, I'll say, hey, would you like to connect with a lender? I can give you a lender contact. No, 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 I'm not ready yet, sort of a thing. So when is too early and when is maybe too late to start those conversations of pre-qualification so that they can understand what their lending capabilities are?
So I would say that it's never too soon, never too early, even if it's just getting a better understanding what the budget should be, what the requirements are, getting that stuff done at the beginning. Like it just, it makes the most sense because now you can focus on your project versus, the financing side. As far as too late, that's usually when someone, it's like, hey, we're looking to build in March and it's February. Right, like I mean, it's 30 to 45 days is we're really making it hard for everything to fall into place like it should. 45 to 60 is probably a more realistic expectation. However, if you want to make it easier on yourself, you start earlier so that everything is done and it just becomes a matter of like, hey, let's just update this real quick. It gets rid of all the uncertainty, I think is the biggest thing. You don't want to think that like I thought
Right.
I was good, but apparently I'm not, and now what?
Is there any disadvantages to starting earlier? Is there any, even if it's a small thing or any? Okay,
Right.
great.
Yeah,
Because that's a
nothing.
lot of people get worried about that, about hitting their credit or different things like that. And well,
Right.
I don't want to do that too early. So,
The credit query
um,
lasts 120 days on credit report and it's a 6 point knock. So unless you have borderline credit to begin with, it's really not going to matter. And again, by the time you like if the credit's good for 120 days, if after that you have to update the credit, the previous inquiry is gone. So there's no lasting effect.
that's
So,
awesome.
so there's really no
Well,
reason.
Let me just answer before you go there. I think that's a good question about timeline because for us, sometimes we get people, Jonathan, that inquire, 5 or 6 years before they're,
oh yeah,
I mean, they're in no
Yeah.
position presently to build, but they know that one day they would like to. And uh, from our perspective, we have no problem with trying to understand what your goals are for a family home or a home for retirement or a cottage or whatever it might be. We have no problem going through a process with you, which for us is it's very easy. We just try to understand what your goals and needs are for a home, and then we'll give you a quote for that particular project, and we could give you a few different quotes for some different scenarios. We're happy to do that. It gives you some grounding on what it is you need to look towards, and then with that quote, talk to Rick, have an early conversation with him. And Rick, you could even do things with soft credit pulls and things like that,
Yep.
where you can just give general good, but sort of general information. This is the kind of down payment you're going to need to have. This is what your payment at this point with credit rates the way they are now. This is what it would look like, and people can go and take that, and then they can plan and save accordingly for that. For that goal that it could be a forever home or something like that. So we've done that. A year and a half prior to actually starting on a project plan, and happy to do it. It helps people sort of figure out whether building's the right scenario for them or not. It
yeah,
isn't for everybody, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. We're happy to go through that process with you to give you some direction.
yeah. Because a lot of people say, I don't want to waste your time, but that's really not the case. I mean, there's only one way to figure these things out, and that's by asking the questions and getting the answers. If you don't do that, then you'll never really know, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, so, Rick, you're clearly very awesome. And so, would you give any maybe final words of wisdom to folks that are watching the podcast today?
I would say don't assume you can't build a new home. A lot of times, I think that that's what happens is, as we've been talking about, is they assume that, like, you know what, unfortunately, there's no, like, I'm never going to get to do it. I'm never going to be able to. And as you had mentioned, we've had several times where someone said, hey, you know what, I'm looking at doing this a year or two out. And so I'll just go through what I call the four C's. I talk about their credit, their capital, meaning how much money they're going to need or have, the capacity, how much they're, could budget for a payment, and then the collateral being the project itself, and so we get a nice rough outline, and that's not something that expires, right? Like that's
Right,
a good
right,
plan for them so that they know, okay, this is my goal. This is what I got to do to get there, right? So in a lot of cases, it's talking to them about saying, listen, if you want to build, this is where you need to be able to build. How long it takes you to get there is up to you. So you might think that you're 2 years out, but you might only be one, or you might not even be that long out. But like coming together and having that and developing that plan that this earlier on, the better, because again, it might expedite your process into when you actually open that window for building. So don't assume, I tell anybody, don't assume you can't build, just know that you need to have a plan if you're going to.
that's great,
Yeah,
that's
for
great.
sure. I think it's like if you have what do they say? Goals not written down are just dreams. But
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
get some hard, you get some hard numbers from us, then dreams can become goals, and you have something to work towards.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's
I,
great, guys. Thanks for
yeah.
your time today. I really
Hey,
appreciate it. This has been great talking through these things together and just helping people get an initial understanding of what it looks like financially to build a home.
hey, thank you for having me, and great job. I know you said that I'm awesome, and I am. But in all seriousness, like you guys really do a great job with the clients and preparing them, and like I said, the handoff and the introduction, and with the work that you do with them makes it a lot easier for me because I don't have people coming back and with issues post closing, why the house is being built or anything like that. So it helps us to continue to service the clients the right way, which is awesome. So you guys keep doing the great job you do, and I'll be always grateful to be assisting the clients with their financing.
Well, my understanding of awesome has always just been the length of hair. So kind of like
Oh,
Samson, his hair is real long, clearly very awesome, right?
Well,
So,
that doesn't help me much.
well, I wasn't going to say that, but yeah. All right,
I'm
Oh,
man.
hanging on for dear life here.
all right, guys. Thanks again for having me.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye bye.